Hello everybody, this is a lesson from Miss Duckworth's classroom, and this is part 2 of how to answer a literature extract question based upon the novel 1984. So we've already gone through how you annotate your extract, how you approach that question, how you find what you want to talk about, and then how you make a plan. So last lesson we looked at what you want to say about how Orwell created such a revealing moment. So you remember this is the key language from the question. We also now have evidence. So we went through and we selected the best quotations, and we went through again and made our final choices. We've got some techniques that we can comment on because, as I said, you should be going through and annotating as you go. Make some notes, think about what it is that you can say about the evidence that you've selected. And then we had a clear plan. So by the end of last lesson, there were several different points that we had down there in terms of what you could say about how Orwell creates such a revealing moment. So at this point, you're now ready to kind of solidify your ideas in terms of your plan and to write up your answer in detail. Just to quickly remind you of what it is that you're being tested on, just because you must keep this in mind at all times, because this will really help to drive what it is that you say about the extract, how you talk about the extract, and how you kind of reference back to the question. So if you remember, we have these different assessment objectives, and what you really want to be doing is focusing on the bits that I've highlighted in yellow. So you do want to show that you've got a fantastic understanding of this extract, what's happening, who is involved, why it's significant, what is revealed to you, why it's revealed, how it's revealed. Referencing to the text, so you must be using quotations here because they're there in front of you. You must be able to show that you can select relevant quotations and then you can talk about them. You must be making inferences and interpretations. So what is suggested to you? What interpretations of meaning can you make? Always be thinking about authorial choice here. How are ideas presented to you? What is even presented to you? Why is it presented in this way? Linking back to author intention. And if you can also link back to context. So sometimes context can help you to enhance your idea, to enhance your interpretation. Don't include context if you're just desperate to add on a fact or figure because you know it. And lastly, and this is actually very, very important here because you're now going to be constructing your essay, it's all about how you present your ideas in a coherent and relevant way. A good plan will definitely help you with this. So a plan will help you to understand the order in which you're going to discuss your ideas, but also how ideas are maybe linked together and how you're building upon these ideas as you move through your essay. You must also show that you are developing a personal response. You are engaging with this extract, you're engaging with the question, and you're able to express yourself well within this essay. So just to remind you, this is the plan that we had at the end of the last lesson. So there are several different points here. Obviously, in the time that you have, you will not be able to talk about all of them because you will have used quite a significant amount of your time already in terms of reading through the extract and ensuring you understand it. Now you want to kind of consolidate your plan. We can't talk about all of these, so what you should be doing is you should be looking at the range of ideas you've just thrown down, deciding which are the best ones, which ones really link back to the quotations that you've highlighted, the quotations that you've now decided. So what's shown in those quotations, and then that's where you will go through and you will try and make sure that you're having a shorter, more concise plan. So I've gone through that process myself. I've looked at all of these, even though they're all valid. I can't talk about everything. So I've decided that the strongest ones are power and control, not only because it's what you definitely do see in the extract, but as a student, I would understand this quite well because the entire novel is about power and control. So I'm going to help myself out a little bit here. And I'm going to pick something that, yes, it's obvious, but it's also something that I know a lot about because you probably have spoken about it in every single lesson that you've done on 1984. The second one is propaganda used by the party. Again, it's definitely something that is evident there, but also it's something that I know a lot about because it's one of the main themes in 1984. How easily history can be rewritten. Evident that this is exactly what Winston's job is all about. So I've got a lot of things that I can talk about here, but I also like this one, the unreliability of information. There's 4 here. I won't get around to talking about 4. It's highly unlikely that in the time I'll be able to talk about 4 in depth, but what I've realized actually is that these 2 are very similar, and you may do something yourself as you're making your plan. I looked at them and I thought, well, actually, history being rewritten and information being unreliable, they're very, very similar. So I'm just going to merge those 2 points together. So really, I've got 3 different sections of my essay that I'm now happy with, and this is going to form the basis of my essay. So just before we go through an answer, I just want to talk you through some of the ways in which I help my own students in terms of building their answer, building a personal response, but also making sure that they're hitting all the different assessment objectives and they're able to get quite a high level on the mark scheme. So you want to be thinking first of all about what it is that you learn. Now I've put here that we've already done this. So this is what I learn. I learn that I can see power and control. I learn how easily history can be written. I learn a lot about how the party used propaganda. So this is actually the what. What do you see? What do you learn? What stands out? What is shown? What is the significance of what you see? And then the second what is your evidence? Now, I already have my evidence because we did it in lesson 1. I went through and I selected the quotations that I wanted to use in the final piece. But what you want to do now is you want to look back at this and think, right, okay, which specific quotations, which specific evidence am I going to use for this point? And the same for this one and for this one. You want to have that ready in your mind, because what you don't want to do is to kind of merge some of these and then be stuck using the same evidence for each one. You want to use a range of different evidence and you want to slot them into the different points. So this is very important. You selecting your evidence, but also making sure that it is relevant. And then we move on to the how. This is really where you're developing your analysis. So how do you learn this? So if we go back to power and control, how do you learn that they're powerful? How do you learn that they wield control? And that's when you're thinking about language, you're thinking about techniques, you're thinking about authorial choices. What methods is Orwell using to present this to you? And it's how it's shown to you. So you could say, for example, tension is created when Orwell uses a list of 3, or when Orwell uses a metaphor. Power is shown by the use of, or you can start with the use of a metaphor indicates that, reveals that. So some of these sentences will help you in terms of developing, really pushing your analysis through. And then finally we end on the why. Why is it shown in this way? You always must consider why something is presented to you in the way that it is. And this again is going back to authorial choices, authorial methods, but also the writer's intention. So think about what Orwell wants you to think, what he wants you to understand, what he wants to show you, and why he wants to do that. And sometimes you can link that back to context. For 1984, it's actually quite a good novel to link back to context. There's so much contextual references that you could be pulling in terms of what Orwell was really feeling at the time and what his concerns were and what he wanted to show you about the world. So if you follow these different steps for each of your sections, for each of the parts of your plan, then you really will be developing your own personal response, but showing the examiner that you can select relevant evidence from the text, but also that you can really do an in-depth interpretation and analysis. In terms of how you structure each of your paragraphs, I call it a paragraph pyramid, mostly because alliteration makes it quite memorable for you. But don't worry if you have a section that is more than one paragraph. So if you want to talk about power and control, it's getting quite long, and you go into a second paragraph, that's absolutely fine. This will still stand for that in terms of your structure. So when you're writing your section, your structure, you are thinking about building. So this is why the idea of a pyramid comes in. So we're starting at the top and then we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you have your clear point, you have what you see, but then you move on to your evidence. Always remember to put your evidence in there. It's how you know that particular thing is presented to you. You're telling the examiner that I can pick a relevant quotation to back up my point. And then you go through your various responses. Now you want to try and build up your responses because it does show depth in terms of your argument, in terms of your personal response. So your first response could be just what does the evidence that you've chosen show you? And then how does it show? And I've given you some words, some phrases. Always try and think about how you're varying the way that you talk about the text, the way that you're talking about the evidence. So this suggests, this implies, reveals, highlights. These are all fantastic words to help you. Then you can take it even further, and this is where you really develop an interpretation, and it shows your own personal response because you're taking the evidence and you're trying to take it as far as you possibly can. You're trying to say as much as you can before you move on to the next one. So you can develop your second response by layering. So this is exactly what it sounds like, layer upon layer. So you make a point, you talk about it, and you say, in addition, it could also suggest, furthermore, the use of. So you're adding to your layers, all based upon your one main point and your one main piece of evidence. You can layer by looking at language, so really zooming in on a particular word and saying why it's been chosen. You can also layer by talking about techniques. So you may start off by talking about a metaphor and then say, in addition, the use of the word. Continuous also shows that. And then if you want to take it even further, and this links back to context and Orwell, you can really think about the effect on the reader. You could even consider the different kinds of readers that you get for 1984. So think about a modern reader, but also think about a contemporary reader of Orwell at that time. And again, I've given you some words and phrases to help you. So always try and think about how you are developing your ideas rather than just rushing through and trying to finish your point and move on to the next. Really consider what you're writing and think about, how much am I really saying about this particular piece of evidence? Can I say something else? Can I show the examiner that I'm able to interpret on many different levels? And here are just some tips for you in terms of how to analyse techniques and how to analyse language. So you have both that you can talk about. And if you are trying to layer, I do suggest that you try and talk about both of them. Whenever you have a technique, there should be something that you all can also say about the language. I'm not going to read through everything on there. You can read that for yourself. If you really want to have a look at it in more detail, just pause the video and just go through the questions. But again, there's a lot of how, what, why questions because they really help you. And just a note here, do link everything back to the question, your initial point, and the author intention. If you keep doing that all the way through and you have that in your mind, then you'll be writing quite a relevant and coherent essay that really targets the question. So here is just a quick example so you can see exactly what it is that I'm doing with a quotation. So I've talked you through how to develop your written analysis, how to talk about techniques, how to talk about language, but I thought it'd be a good idea just to show you that before we go through an essay. So this is the first quotation that I think that I want to use. And like I said to you, always think about what you're linking it back to in terms of your plan. So the point of my plan that I think this really goes with is power and control. If you go back to the extract, you'll realise that this is actually the first point. So the first piece of evidence that I decided that I wanted to use. So I'm going to try and go in order. Always helps you if you go in order because then you can talk about how ideas are developing, how themes are developing, how ideas are joined together. So I've gone for this quotation here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to be considering these different questions because I want to say as much as I can. I want to try and talk about more than just one thing. So I'm going to be thinking about which words stand out to me, and I'm going to identify those and think about what they suggest. What kind of word it is? Is there a technique there? So is there multiple techniques that I can talk about? Connotations of words, what they suggest, but also why they've been used. And I'm going to really try and link it back to the question, which, just to remind you, is how does Orwell make this such a revealing moment? And it's that word revealing that we really want to focus on. Some phrases over here to help you. Using these kinds of phrases, as I've said before, really does help you to push forward with your ideas. I think sometimes with essays it's quite difficult to know how to express yourself. So just having some stock words or phrases like shows, suggests, implies, reveals, this really does help you to develop your responses. So this is the quotation. The process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs. So think about how that sounds when you read it and think about why. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was a technique. So I've gone for a technique first of all, and my technique is a list. But also I noticed when looking at it again that it's an asyndetic list, which is when there's a lack of conjunctions. Now usually in a list like this you would expect a conjunction at the end, but as you can see there isn't one. So there's a lack of conjunctions here. So I've identified my technique. That's not enough though. So I know how power and control are shown. They're shown through this list. But now I want to know why. I want to know what is suggested. I want to know what the effects of this list are. So here are just some notes. And these are the notes that I will use to build my essay. So it shows ultimate control over everything, shows domination, shows that there is no end to this list, could suggest futility, and it could suggest pessimism. So if you notice, I've gone for maybe more obvious points up here, and then I've really taken these ideas further. I've linked to some of the overarching ideas in the novel, some of the themes. So Winston is quite pessimistic, and there is this air of futility throughout the novel. No matter what you do, nothing will change. So I'm going to see if I can link this in at some point. This maybe will develop my personal response a little bit further. I've also noticed that in this list we have lots of different types of media. So books, pamphlets, posters, films, we have all kinds of different media, multimedia. To me, I think it shows the extent of their power. They don't just select something that's in print, they can select something that is visual, but something that is also audio. It shows how far-reaching their power is. And note how I'm also constantly going back to my own point here. I'm also using the vocabulary from the question just to make sure that the examiner knows that what I'm saying is relevant. And again, I'm just going to take it further. I'm going to try and develop my interpretation beyond what I see. I think that this could show their paranoia. If you're trying to control every single thing, then it shows how paranoid you are, how desperate for power you really are. And then I'm going to do what I've suggested to you here, which is then try and think about words. So I've commented quite a lot here on the list and what I see and what I think about the list. But now, is there anything that stands out? Any words? And for me, the word that really stood out was the word continuous. And I thought to myself, okay, what does this word suggest? What does it show me? Why has he used it? And I think that this word continuous reveals that it's something that's ongoing. It's a process that really doesn't end. Perhaps it's got a life of its own now, and it's an unstoppable force, much like the party themselves. So I've got a lot that I can say just from one quotation, and this is what I mean when I talk about layering. You make one analysis here, and in addition it could also suggest, furthermore we also see, so always try and layer, talk about as much as you possibly can. So this is just a quick example of what I'm going to be doing with the evidence once I put it all into an essay. Okay, so we're going to look at an example. So I just want you to, as we go through the example, think about how the assessment objectives are being met, but also the checklist at the bottom. So it's always a good idea to have a checklist just for yourself. It may not look like this checklist, it may be something completely different, but your checklist is a reminder for you. It's so that when you're in your exam, you've got this checklist in your head and you're telling yourself, right, I must remember to continuously focus on the question. I must remember to embed my quotation. I must remember to layer my interpretation. So it's completely up to you what your checklist includes. This is just an overview of the different areas that you must make sure that you're commenting on in terms. So as we go through, I'm just going to highlight for you the different areas of all of this that we can see in the essay, just so that you're able to look at how the essay is constructed, but also how it meets all of the different assessment objectives. As you can see, this is not the full essay. This is just the first section of an essay, just so you've got an idea and a feel for what an essay would look like. So let's begin. In this extract, Orwell powerfully presents the power of the party and reveals the extent to which they will go to in order to maintain their power. So look how I'm already using some of my own terminology from the plan. So all of those keywords that I've included in the plan, I want to make sure that I include them in my essay and even in this mini introduction, just so the examiner's got an idea of where my essay is going. This extract is particularly revealing as we're able to see not only the inner workings of the party, but also Winston's role within it. In this extract, we are given an insight into Winston's job at the Ministry of Truth and how easily history, facts, and the truth can be manipulated to fit in with the party's ideology. So as you can already see, I'm showing the examiner, I'm proving to them that I've read the extract, I understand the extract, I know who's involved, I know what's happening, I know where it is, but most importantly, I know the significance of this extract. So already I'm showing that I know all of this. So let's move into the first point. So this is the first point from my plan, which as I've already explained to you is the power and control. So the extract begins with, again, I'm looking at this in chronological order. If you've got a point that you want to mention from your plan and you're using multiple different quotations from different parts of the extract, that's absolutely fine. You will not be able to maybe go in a continuous order. But for this one, I've got one quotation that I'm using at the beginning, so I can go in chronological order. It helps you to kind of maintain your focus, makes it a little bit more organised, and it adds some structure to your essay. So the extract begins with a description of the process of correction and alteration of public documents. Orwell uses a continuous asyndetic list in order to highlight the extent to which information is controlled and manipulated by the party. So I've already included here what's happening, but I've also included the technique, and I've included my own keyword from the plan. So this really is my point. I want to look at the power and control of the party. So now I'm going to move on to talk about the list in a little bit more detail. The list presents the idea that all forms of media are controlled, from newspapers to photographs. So now I've got my evidence in there, so the examiner knows exactly which list I'm talking about. The use of asyndeton shows that there is no end to what the party can alter, as we're not given a final conjunction to suggest we've come to the end of the list. So this is my first interpretation of what this means. Instead, the use of asyndeton highlights the fact that the party will continue to influence all types of information, regardless of the form. So I'm now analysing the effect of this technique, of this list, and I'm trying to interpret the meaning, and I'm trying to do it on multiple different layers. So I have one explanation here, and then I have another. This idea is extremely reminiscent of the Soviet Union and the way in which information and photographs were censored and exploited to suit the needs of the state. So this is where you can use context to highlight your point, to help you. So be wary of just bolting context onto the end of something. Make sure it's very relevant. And as you can see, I'm talking about something that's almost the same as what Orwell is presented. So it's the manipulation and the control of documents and how the public view them. It could be argued, so notice the phrasing that I'm using here. So as I've said to you all the way through, the phrases that you use really help you to develop your response. It helps you to sound a little bit more sophisticated as well in terms of how you're building up your essay. It could be argued that Orwell replicates a method famously used by Stalin in order to place Winston's experiences within our own reality and to remind us that this is not merely fiction, it is something that has happened and can happen again. So again, the continuation with the context, but also the context is linked now to author intention. So you're really saying why you think Orwell has done this and how it can link back to not only the context, but the effect on the reader. This would be particularly powerful for a 1949 reader, as they would be increasingly fearful of the potential power of totalitarian states. So now you're being more specific about the reader. You're talking about Orwell's own contemporaries, and you're showing that you understand what was happening at the time that he was writing it, and also what he's trying to show his reader. In addition, so by the use of this phrase here, the examiner now knows that I'm going to be layering what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to try and talk about more than just one thing. And if you think back to the slide where I had the quotation on there and I was analysing it, I'm now going to maybe talk about language. So you have the technique, you've analysed the technique, you've interpreted what you think that technique means and why it's been used, and now you're trying to layer. What else can you talk about from within that quotation? In addition to the use of an almost exhaustive list. So even though this is one section, I've had to divide it into two paragraphs. But in order to make sure my ideas transition well and there's a clear structure, I've linked. So I have this phrase which shows that I'm transitioning from one paragraph to the next. So this is a linking phrase. In addition to the use of an almost exhaustive list, Orwell also refers to this process as being continuous. So this is now where I'm talking about language. By using this adjective, Orwell creates the impression that it almost has a life of its own, and Winston is merely a facilitator at the mercy of this operation rather than in control of it. So you can see here that I've got my evidence. I've introduced it, but I've also embedded it. So you don't always need a full sentence for your evidence. It can be a one word, but I've introduced what's happening and why that word has been included. I've said what kind of word it is. It's an adjective. And now I'm trying to talk about the effect. This is where I'm analysing that word and I'm interpreting the meaning. Orwell may have chosen this word to present the information in this way to further emphasise the fact that Winston is merely a puppet following orders. So this is my personal response, and this is where I'm really developing my interpretation further. By presenting Winston in this way, the reader is once again reminded that, regardless of Winston's role in the outer party, the ultimate power and control is always wielded by the inner party. So we've also gone back to author intention, we've gone back to the effect on the reader, and we've gone back to our original point, which is power and control. And we're also always focusing on what is revealed. So what is revealed here is how Winston is engaging with this process and what his role is to this process. So we're also inadvertently referring back to the question and the wording from the question. So as you can see, we did tick all of these boxes. We've moved through the first point from the plan, used our evidence, analysed, commented on technique, commented on language, said as much as we possibly could before moving on. So the next part of this essay would then be the next point on the plan. Okay, so the final tips for this lesson. Just remember to make sure that you've got clear, focused points in a chronological order if possible, that you're choosing relevant and interesting quotations. Please don't choose a quotation that when you're writing your essay you realise you've got nothing to say about it. Use of keywords or synonyms or indirect references to the keywords throughout. Name and analyse the technique, so you must say that you know what kind of technique it is, but then why it's been used. Analyse the language choice by the author. Always link back to Orwell's intention and the effect on the reader. Use context if it supports you, if it enhances your ideas, not just as an add-on. And try and use those academic phrases all the way through to help you suggest, reveals. It could be argued that. So really try and think about how you're expressing yourself in your essay. So thank you very much for taking part in this lesson. I hope it was helpful for you. Look out for the next lesson, which is how to answer the full novel question. Thank you very much. Goodbye.